Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in the truly amazing text, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. And we are interested now in passage number 6. Now I'm going to make the argument that one of the reasons we read all of Leaves of Grass is so that we can find buried within the very heart of it some of the most amazing lines that you will ever read. And I certainly consider this to be one of the most amazing passages in all of Leaves of Grass. Certainly because it's going to present us with what I'll call Whitman's inclusivist theodicy. That is to say, why do bad things have to happen? And how can I somehow appropriate that line? Why did this happen not to me, but rather for me? I've had students that say, this is what I've been looking for so long. A writer that will actually tell me the truth. Also, we will see here that Whitman will meet the 7 deadly sins, as they're often referred to, and we're going to pay attention to the way that he plays that game. This is often referred to as the dark patches passage. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt is our playlist, and that you've been working with us from the inscriptions all the way up through and including passage 5 of Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. I want to just, though, begin with some echo passages as we've been referring to them. Hey, do you guys remember this one from starting from Pomenoc, the passage number 7? Do you remember this one? He says, I make the poem of evil also. I commemorate that part also. I am myself just as much evil as good, and my nation is. And I say, there is in fact no evil. Or, if there is, I say it's just as important to you, to the land, or to me as anything else. Borrowing heavily from Emerson's Divinity School address, good is positive, evil is merely private, not absolute. It is like cold, which is privation of heat, end quote. How about this for a set of lines? Do you remember this one from Song of Myself, passage number 22? He says it this way: I am not the poet of goodness only. I do not decline to be the poet of wickedness also. And then he says, what blurt is this about virtue and about vice? Evil propels me, and reform of evil propels me. I stand indifferent. Now, this is some kind of really interesting lines, especially when you place it right next to passage number 6 of Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. It is not upon you alone the dark patches fall. The dark threw its patches down upon me also. The best I had done seemed to me blank and suspicious. My great thoughts, as I supposed them, were they not in reality meager? Nor is it you alone who know what it is to be evil. I am he who knew what it is to be evil. I, too, knitted the old knot of contrariety, blabbed, blushed, resented, lied, stole, grudged, had guile, anger, lust, hot wishes, I dare not speak, was wayward, vain, greedy, shallow, sly, cowardly, malignant. The wolf, the snake, the hog, not wanting in me. The cheating look, the frivolous word, the adulterous wish, not wanting. Refusals, hates, postponements, meanness, laziness, none of these wanting. Was one with the rest, the days and haps of the rest. Was called by the night his name by clear loud voices of young men as they saw me approaching or passing, felt their arms on my neck as I stood, or the negligent leaning of their flesh against me as I sat. Saw many I loved in the street or ferry boat or public assembly, yet never told them a word. Lived the same life with the rest, the same old laughing, gnawing, sleeping, played the part that still looks back on the actor or actress, the same old role, the role that is what we make it, as great as we like or as small as we like, or both, great and small. Now, I have called this passage Whitman's Confessions passage, built around the idea of St. Augustine's confessions. Let's go to work now with this passage, and it is to me one of the most remarkable. Remember that we said Whitman is always promising that he will be honest with us, that he's going to tell us something, and I think here he does pull back the curtain for a moment, and he does show us, let me tell you what I've been consumed with, what has haunted me at the dark patches. Notice he'll begin, however, by telling us, you're not alone. It's not upon you alone the dark patches fall, right? By the way, dark patches is the only time in all of Leaves of Grass that phrase gets used. The dark threw its patches down upon me also. So we're here in the theodicy passage, right? This is one of the most obviously theodictic passages. In other words, theodicy. Why do bad things have to happen to good people? And then he says it, and I'm certain, invoking the 29th sonnet of Shakespeare. Do you guys remember this? When in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him, with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Look at the next line. The best I had done seemed to me blank and suspicious. Well, here it is. And I've had students that are just blown away by this self-portrayal, this self-doubt, the authenticity to say, hey, I know exactly what it is to doubt what I've done. Now, of course, as we've said in our biographic information about Whitman, he doubted a lot of what he did in Leaves of Grass because it wasn't accepted in his own time. He says, my great thoughts, as I suppose them, were they not in reality meager? And this is a very unusual word for him to use. Lesser than, right? That is to say, not the very best at all. And he'll use this word one other time in a set of lines. Nor is it you alone. We're back to that notion of you alone. Nor is it you alone who know what it is to be evil. I am he who knew, interesting phrase, tense, right? Knew what it is to be evil, right? And then we go back to the construction of I too. Only now, I too will be for us constructed around a list. Now, a list of what? Well, I think possibly the 7 deadly sins list. And he's going to begin with, I too knitted the old knot of contrariety. Now, this old knot, by the way, think about how knot is used in 1 Hour to Madness and Joy. Just go back and look at the genius of how he comes back to that phrase, the idea of the knot. Notice that he says the word old now 3 times in this poem. In other words, these are the challenges that go way, way back in time. Now, you'll enjoy doing this with me, although I'm not going to get into detail here because I don't want to make this lecture too long. But think about the 7 deadly sins of pride and greed and lust and envy and gluttony and wrath and sloth or laziness. And as we go through this list, just decide where you would put each one of these in one of those areas of the deadly sins. I too knotted the old knot of contrariety, of course. This is the only use, by the way, in all Leaves of Grass. But think about how it is that Whitman is the poet of contrariety, no question. He says, 6 first to list. Blabbed, blushed. That's an interesting one given some of the readings that we've worked with. Resented, lied, stole, grudged. And then 4 more. Had guile, anger, lust, hot wishes I dared not speak. We've seen this several times gestured at, and here it becomes like full open, kind of like turning the light on it. Was, and now we're gonna get 7. Watch this: wayward, vain, greedy, shallow. We're gonna remember the shallow from Song of Myself, passage 46. I will you to jump into the midst of the sea, not the shallow areas. Sly, that's an interesting one. Cowardly, malignant. It's interesting that there's 7 there listed, and again, the 7 deadly sins. And then he'll say it this way: the wolf, the snake, the hog, not wanting in me. We're going to get this not wanting phraseology 2 more times. Interesting that he would pick these animals, the wolf, the snake. We've seen serpentine already, the hog. Of course, that becomes kind of the word picture of all word pictures. The hogs, the disgusting, right? The always wanting, and then we're to the gluttonous, obviously, right? The cheating look, very interesting. The frivolous word, the adulterous wish. We've seen this already in Leaves of Grass a couple of times. Not wanting, coming back to that phraseology. Then we'll get 5. Refusals, hates, postponements, put off, put off, put off. Meanness, it's an interesting word. It means like lowly, if you will. And then he uses the word laziness, which is fascinating because you'll remember in Song of Myself, passage 1, he talks about loafing. And for him, loafing is celebrated, only now it's laziness. So there must be a difference in his mind between loafing and being lazy. None of these wanting, was one with the rest, the days and haps of the rest. By the way, the word haps here, only used in all of Leaves of Grass, but what we're really talking about here with haps is, right, bad karma, we might say, a bad luck, right? Was called, he continues, was called by my nightest name, back to the dark patches, right? By clear, loud voices of young men. Notice he doesn't say women here, just men, right? As they saw me approaching or passing, felt their arms on my neck. We've seen this several times in Leaves of Grass, this idea of arms on the necks, right? As I stood, or the negligent leaning of their flesh against me as I sat. Think about the genius of the use of the word leaning, when just a few lines above he was using the word loaf. And obviously, readers, several of you smiling already, because yes, you're right, that is passage 1 of Song of Myself. I lean and loaf and invite my soul and all of that, right? Of course, this idea of leaning of their flesh against me, as I said, is going to take us to some very homoerotic language here. And there's so many readers of Leaves of Grass of Whitman's day that had been waiting for something like this, going, I kind of figured I knew a little bit about what was going on, and now all of a sudden he's going to share some of this with me. This is confession time for Whitman. It's powerful to sit right in the middle of Leaves of Grass, right in the middle of Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Here it is. Saw many I loved in the street or ferry boat, taking us, of course, back to the focus of the ferry, or public assembly, yet never told them a word. Notice, we're back to this I dared not speak. Never told them a word. Lived the same life with the rest. I mean, go back to the end of Song of the Open Road, and the way in which he challenges so much of those people who hide behind masks to come out. And yet here it is, he says, I was an actor. I was an actor. Taking us back to the opening lines, of course, of Ferry here in this poem, of talking about the idea of costumes and garments that are being worn. Live the same life with the rest, the same old, second use of the word old, laughing, gnawing, sleeping. By the way, this word gnawing will come back one other time in Wound Dresser Part 3. It's fascinating to go and take a look at the way he used it there. Played the part that still looks back on the actor or actress, the same old role, third time, same old role, the role that is what we make it, as great as we like, or as small as we like, or both great and small, making us think, of course, of Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Such a compelling set of lines. What are we going to even do to begin to kind of process this set of lines? Well, I think at 2A we can point out the artist for Whitman is defined by his authentic honesty. It is what so many readers are hoping for, longing for. Of course, let's say it out loud. This is the kind of passage that would make an Emerson, that would make Melville, that would make a Hawthorne feel not only just slightly, but very uncomfortable. Certainly even Thoreau, because it's just so honest. It's just so there in your face and authentic, right? And to that degree, self-exposure is hard, it is difficult, and of course this is a form of self-confession that we will see. At 2B, I just want to point out, I mean, so much that we could say about not what is said, but how it is said, and obviously playing off of the idea of the 7 deadly sins, but I just want to point out his use of the word old. That is to say, he is taking us back, vis-a-vis obviously our Milton and Paradise Lost, to the oldest of understandings of what it is to have some sense of guilt, some sense of shame. Certainly we're playing this. And yet notice by the end of the poem, he's ready to admit, I was an actor just like everyone else who has to somehow, what is it that T.S. Eliot says in Proof Frog, to prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet. At 3A, I have so many suggestions here that I could make that I just won't. We've already mentioned St. Augustine's Confessions. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on St. Augustine. I want to just take us, though, for a few moments to Tolstoy's Autobiography. For those of you who will maybe remember these lines, he says, at a point in his life at around 50, he says it this way, "My position was terrible." By the way, the great Jordan Peterson has commented on this a number of times. "My position was terrible. I knew that I could find nothing in the way of rational knowledge except a denial of life. And in faith, I could find nothing except a denial of reason, and this was even more impossible than a denial of life. According to rational knowledge, it followed that life is evil and people know it. They do not have to live, yet they have lived, and they do live, just as I myself had lived, even though I had known for a long time that life is meaningless and evil." In quote, think about the power of how Whitman is playing a very similar kind of game. Of course, we could mention Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a word that actually gets used in this poem, as we pointed out. And of course, Shakespeare's Sonnet 29, as we read, is truly compelling to see that maybe in some ways, we feel like Whitman is maybe channeling that famous sonnet of Shakespeare in 29. Of course, we pointed out many times in our lectures on Shakespeare, isn't it an amazing thing, that the cat who wrote Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, Much Ado About Nothing will write Sonnet 29, where he basically says, "There's times when I feel like a total loser." What is it that Whitman said, or that Whitman says here? "The best I had done seemed to me blank and suspicious." What a compelling single line. I have had students that say that's the most precious line in all of Leaves of Grass because it's the one with which students can most identify with. And since we are there at 3P, how can we own a passage like this? Well, how about you? I mean, what confessions have you made, and to whom have you been willing to make them in your life? How about this one? Is confession really cathartic for you? Certainly in many religious traditions the argument is made that way. Certainly Aristotle in his Poetics made the argument that purgation or catharsis is vital. To what degree do you find this kind of passage almost like a mirroring passage? How about this one? Is there some way for you to think about this as being some of the most honest writing that you have read, certainly in Leaves of Grass? Finally, it's as if Whitman says, I want to prove to you that I too am just like you. I'm no different, I'm just like you. And to that degree, to finish, Whitman's theodicy is, don't ask, why did this happen to me? But rather, why did this happen for me? Notice at the end of this passage, he is talking about, whether great or small, that we all may contribute a verse, he will say in another poem, to the drama. And in that regards, we all have to figure out how we're playing roles and how we're living through those roles. What a compelling passage. I hope you're being challenged in this study. Thank you.